So the value of all cryptocurrencies has now crossed $1 trillion, and it's now the 5th largest currency by value in the world. So true story, when I first started investing in and buying Bitcoin, I didn't know how to relate its price to anything real because Bitcoin is not like stocks. There's a lot of things we can look at for stocks to determine whether a stock is under or overpriced and whether we should buy now or wait. But when it comes to Bitcoin and crypto, it's sort of like this elusive idea because cryptos are not like companies. They're more like commodities, which are closer to gold and oil in that they're not real companies and they don't make any cash flow. So in this video, I want to show you everything I know about fundamental analysis that you can use to help you make a better decision about buying Bitcoin now or waiting until later. It's going to seem complicated, but I promise it's nowhere near as complicated as this really bad card trick that I've been learning. It's really hard and I don't know why the cards are different colors, but there it is. And I promise it's gonna all come together. It's gonna be a light bulb moment. It's gonna be like, oh, I get it now. And it's gonna be awesome. So having said all that, let's begin. Hi, my name is Andrei Jikh. Hope you're doing good. Come for the finance and stay for the weird stuff. And the first thing I want to get out of the way is to show you my crypto portfolio. So this is it right here, and I just want to share with you that I have a vested interest in Bitcoin growing in value, and that also my opinion might be compromised, and also that I'm not a pro expert. I don't stare at chart patterns all day long, but I was still able to grow my account into what it is today. And if you watch this video all the way through, you'll be able to do it as well because I made this video specifically for beginners, regardless of what your skill level is, and I'm gonna do all that without trying to sell you any courses. So let's start with the fundamental analysis and then let's go macro. Now, fundamental just means that we are looking at factual, measurable data to try to see if something is over or underpriced. And then the macro stuff is a way of taking all the stuff we know to put together a narrative of where something might go in the future. Now, fundamental sounds way more complicated because it's more numeric and numbers based, but it's actually the easier of the two. And then the macro stuff sounds easier, but it's a little more nuanced. So it's counterintuitive. So the first metric we're gonna take a look at is smashing the like button. If the button is blue, the fundamentals are good, but if it's grayed out, the macro future of my channel is not gonna look too good. The first fundamental metric we're gonna look at is the on-chain data. Specifically, we're gonna take a look at what's called transaction volume. So the transaction volume is a measurement of how much people are transacting on the Bitcoin network. And why is that important? It's important because it tells us how much people are actually using this technology rather than just speculating on the price when it's at an all-time high. And over a long period of time, we want to see the transaction volume grow. And this can include everything from me sending you Bitcoin to you sending me it, or even sending it to something like BlockFi where you can earn up to 8.6% annual compound interest and get up to $250 worth of free Bitcoin using my link below. Smooth. But if you go to blockchain.com/charts, this is an amazing resource. It's free, so please use it, but it shows you a ton of different charts. But one of the more interesting charts is the transaction volume. So if you click on that, you're gonna see a graph over the last year of all of these transactions, and it looks crazy. And this is not a very accurate representation of how much Bitcoin is growing because right now we are going through an insane growth phase where there's a lot of hype and FOMO, fear of missing out, everybody wants to buy it, so it looks a little all over the place. So instead, if you click on all time, you can see that from the year 2009, which is when Bitcoin was created, all the way till today in 2021, you can see that their transaction volume has been steadily increasing. And this is really good. This tells us that the Bitcoin network effect has sort of taken on a life of its own and it's started to grow and become widely accepted. And I promise I'll relate back to what this means for the price later in the video, but here's another really interesting metric to take a look at. And that is wallet data. Because what's really interesting is that when you buy Bitcoin for the first time through something like Gemini or Coinbase, you're given a unique wallet address ID. So let's jump back into blockchain.com and I want to show you some wallet data. Because from the years 2009 to 2021, we can see that the unique wallet address IDs have grown to 64.7 million wallets. And this is important because it is increasing the network effect that is Bitcoin. I emphasize network effect because it's something that a lot of critics of Bitcoin don't quite fully understand. For example, they'll say things like Bitcoin is not unique and that it can be copied. And that's literally true. You can copy and paste the code right now and create your own Bitcoin. It's not that difficult. I mean, I don't know how to do it, but I've heard it's easy, so I believe those people. But what can't be copied is the network effect. And those are things like wallets, the amount of people using Bitcoin, the amount of businesses using Bitcoin, the security, the hash rate, the transaction volume, the brand loyalty, the trust. All of that stuff cannot be copied by simply copying and pasting the code itself. So anyway, the amount of unique wallet addresses is growing, and that's contributing to the growing network effect. But another metric we can take a look at is what makes Bitcoin a safe transfer of value. I mean, how safe is it really when you hear people getting their coins stolen all the time, right? But let me show you something that makes Bitcoin the safest transfer of value in the entire world. Let's take a look at something called the hash rate. Now, the hash rate is just a way of measuring the computing power of the Bitcoin network. Now, right now, there are roughly 42 million millionaires out there in the world, and there will only ever be 21 million Bitcoins in all of existence. So the question becomes, how much of Bitcoin's price is inflated and how much of it is real? And this is one of the questions that my friend Graham Stephan had about Bitcoin in one of the critiques. So I hope this next part helps anybody with that same critique answer that question. You've probably heard of people called miners, not to be confused with underage wizards. These are computer wizards that use their computers to automatically solve complex equations and algorithms. Now, I've used this analogy before, but imagine these miners are solving this Rubik's Cube, which is the block, and once they do it successfully, they actually get Bitcoin rewards from the Rubik's Cube itself, which is really interesting because as Bitcoin grows in value, the more people want to join in on the fun to try to solve the block because the reward is more valuable. But what's interesting about that is that the more people join in on the fun, the more secure the network becomes and the more resistant from attacks it becomes as well. And that all obviously increases the value and the trust in the system. So let me jump back into blockchain.com and show you what's happened to the hash rate over the last 10 years. As you can see, over the last 10 years, the hash rate has grown exponentially, which is great because that is exactly how new technology gets adopted. It never grows in a linear line. It starts off slow and then boom, it just starts to take off. So right now, the Bitcoin network is capable of 151 terahashes per second. What does that mean? That means it is capable of 151 trillion calculations per second. But what does that mean? So when we look at things like the transaction volume, like the wallets, like the hash rate, we start to understand that the network itself is actually growing, and that the more people we have, the more miners, the more wallets, the more users, the more businesses, the more use this gets, and we compare it to the max supply of 21 million, we start to understand that there's just not enough Bitcoin enough for the entire world. And so the network is actually growing based on real calculated data that we could look at and put a value on. So hopefully I've shown you some on-chain fundamental analysis that shows you that at least this growth is fueled by real measurable data rather than just a speculative growth and just a hype bubble. But as far as knowing when to buy or when to wait, then you have to go one step further. In order to get the full broad perspective of what Bitcoin is and where it's going, we have to look at the broad macro perspective. And this is where I've spent most of my time trying to understand what the heck this technology even is, but it gets a little bit deeper and a little bit more nuanced from this point on. So let me try to compare Bitcoin to other forms of technology that we've created in the past using something called the S-curve. Whenever we've created any kind of tech, whether it's been the microwave or the refrigerator, the cell phone, the internet, they've all followed the same general path of adoption, which is called the S-curve. Now, the S-curve is just a measure of how long it takes for technology to penetrate the market, which I'm not sure what this has to do with explaining it, but I just thought it was really cool. Sorry, couldn't help myself. So anyway, on this S-curve, once we get to what's called the inflection point, that's when adoption becomes exponentially faster. So for example, when we created the automobile or the car, that took roughly 80 years for most people in the US to get one. When we created the telephone system, that took roughly 50 years for most people to adopt. When we created the refrigerator, that took roughly 25 years. And when we created the internet, that took roughly 20 years. All of this data, by the way, is US based. But when it comes to Bitcoin, it's gonna get adopted far faster. That's because as technology improves, that S-curve gets squeezed. That's because we have things like YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, all of these social media outlets where information travels far, far quicker. Therefore, that adoption curve rises much, much faster. So anyway, on this S-curve, Bitcoin is right about here. This is the inflection point, the early adopters phase. Now, believe it or not, last year in 2020, Bitcoin did around $1 trillion of on-chain transaction volume. And that is significant because that is more than PayPal, Venmo, and Apple Pay. And that tells me that this technology is somewhere in the tail end of the early adopters phase and about to enter the early majority phase. And that's gonna be between the years of 2021 to 2030. And there's gonna be a few catalysts that'll help us get there. And we already had one earlier this year that helped us get to this point. But once it hits 88 miles per hour, you're gonna see some serious stuff. Remember, one of the few catalysts that kicked off from $20,000 to the $40,000 that we're at right now is the Federal Reserve announcing quantitative easing to infinity and beyond. But if someone like Elon Musk or some other visionary tech leader decides to accept it and convert a part of their company's cash reserves into something like Bitcoin as a hedge against inflation, then we're gonna see the dominoes start to fall. And this has already started to happen on a smaller scale. Another interesting catalyst is that the Democrats are in full control of Congress and the presidency, which means you get a stimulus, everyone gets a stimulus. And this is all really good news because the more money everyone has, the more retail buying we get. Another potential catalyst is the Bitcoin ETF, because right now buying Bitcoin directly is pretty complicated. Even though I made a video about it, people still had tons and tons of questions. So instead of buying it directly, why not buy it through an ETF and then put it inside of your retirement account? Once that happens, the price will explode. Another catalyst is something really interesting with favorable regulation, because right now we're seeing the OCC give permission to crypto companies to partner up with banks to hold custody over Bitcoin, which means instead of holding it on some cold storage wallet that you may or may not trust, instead people will be able to have their Bitcoin stored with their bank. That's Citibank, Chase, US Bank, all the central banks potentially, which is huge, because then we could maybe even buy Bitcoin through the banks directly. So all of this is extremely positive news that I think we'll see sometime either this year or at least this decade. But now that you know all that, I want to show you something that's going to help you make the final decision on whether you should wait or buy now. Let me introduce you to the Mario Kart Rainbow Road equivalent, which is the rainbow chart of Bitcoin. That's really interesting because it uses something called logarithmic regression, which is just a way of looking at the price from a backwards perspective using not linear scales, but logarithmic scales. And what's interesting is that depending on the price level and the time frame that we're in, it'll show you a different kind of analysis for what Bitcoin is doing. Like for example, right now, we're in the HODL phase, which means strap in, we are about to go for a wild ride. We're not necessarily at the top, but it's not cheap to buy Bitcoin, nor is it really expensive. It's somewhere in the middle. Surprisingly silly, but interestingly pretty accurate too. But please use this for entertainment purposes only. This is not actual investing advice. So should you buy Bitcoin now or wait? That is the question of this video. So here's what I would do. I would start dollar cost averaging into the market over time enough to not feel like I had FOMO and this fear of missing out, but not too much money where I felt this sinking feeling in my stomach every time I saw the price drop. But think about it like this. If you had bought Bitcoin at the tail end of 2017 in December for $20,000 each, and if you had held on, you would have 2x'd your money at this point, which is still an incredible return on your money. But if you had dollar cost averaged into the market over that same period of time between 2017 to 2021, you would have made several 100%, which is insane. So I might want to put 10% of my monthly income into Bitcoin and treat it like a retirement account that I can't touch. And if hypothetically that $10,000 grows into something like $50,000, then I might want to sell that initial principal value of $10,000 to cover it and make myself feel safe. And that other $40,000 is play money that I never had to begin with. And that's a really interesting little mental trick that you can use to really help you out. But even at $40,000 per Bitcoin, we are still very, very early. In the meantime, I want to thank Anthony Pompliano. I just got off the phone with him, got to verify some of this information, pick his brain a little bit. And if you don't follow his newsletter already, what are you doing? Go sign up right now and tell him Andrei sent you. He is one of the smartest people in the crypto space. So please go do that. And in the meantime, go grab your 4 free stocks with Webull by depositing $100. 2 of those stocks can be valued up to $1,600 each. You can grab a 5th free stock from Robinhood and up to $250 worth of free Bitcoin with BlockFi using this link right here. Love you, thank you so much. I will see you back here on Monday and Friday, sometimes a Wednesday, and in the meantime, let me know what your thoughts are about Bitcoin. Love you, I'll see you soon, bye-bye.